Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this wonderful afternoon with some eminent and distinguished panelists that I have today. The topic that we are going to discuss is very, very competitive in this scenario. And I am honored and privileged to actually host this and be a part of this illustrious panel as a moderator. So we have Mr. Akhil Gupta with us. We have Mr. Vikram Gupta. We have Mr. Ramakant Sharma. We have Mr. Kaushik Mukherjee, Ms. Archana Khosla Burman, and Mr. Santosh Ganesh with us. Let me first give a brief introduction of all the esteemed panelists, so that we have the context set and the understanding of why we all are here together and what all this esteemed panelists will bring on the table for this particular topic called Navigating Currents of Capital Raise, a 360-degree view. Okay? So let me first get the honor of introducing Mr. Vikram Gupta. He is the founder and managing director at IVCap, a venture capital fund management company for professional entrepreneurs. He has over 22 years of experience in the private equity, business consulting, M&A, strategy and operations in the healthcare and life sciences, education, consumer good and other industries. He also has held leadership positions across various well-known companies in India and abroad. And he has also been a driver of various aspects of consulting, M&A strategy and operations in these particular sectors. IVCap Ventures is India's first innovation and technology VC fund that leverages the alumni ecosystem for investing, value creation and divesting. IVCap Ventures Trust Fund has invested in more than around 2 to 3 dozen innovative businesses. So, Mr. Vikram Gupta, thank you so much for joining us here today, and we are delighted to be part of this.
Thank you for having me here.
Next panelist, yes sir, is Mr. Ramakant Sharma. Mr. Ramakant Sharma plays a central role in driving all technology innovations that form the backbone of LivSpaces. So he is the founder of LivSpaces. While leading the operations team, before founding LivSpaces, Ramakant was a core team member and a vice president of engineering at Myntra, a leading fashion e-commerce in India, which was acquired by Flipkart, as we all know. Ramakant also is a graduate from IIT Kanpur and holds an MBA from Indian School of Business, Hyderabad. LivSpaces was launched in 2015 in India and is now a trusted brand for complete home interior design, thousands of homeowners. So welcome Ramakantji to this fabulous session, and we look forward to exciting learning from you as well.
Thank you, Avesh. Nice to be here. Thank you.
My next dynamic speaker is Ms. Archana Khosla Burman. She is the founder partner at Vertices Partners. Her specialization areas are corporate commercial law, venture capital and private equity investments. Her skill also includes M&A and joint ventures. She is a professional experience and her experience extends to diverse sectors such as financial services, consumer products, healthcare, education, pharma, to name a few. She's also been featured in the Asia's Legal Business magazine, also 40 under 40 list in the APAC region, and also has been awarded as Entrepreneur of the Year 2019. And she has been a speaker on several platforms. Archana also sits on the advisory board of several startups in the country. Thank you so much, Archana, for joining us today, and welcome aboard.
Thank you, Bhavesh. It's an absolute pleasure.
My next esteemed panelist is Mr. Akhil Gupta. He is the founder of NoBroker. He is passionate about consumer products and a strong advocate of problem solving and using technology and automation. NoBroker is the world's largest C2C real estate platform that is eliminating intermediaries in the real estate transactions with a tech-based approach. NoBroker is an algorithmic-based managed NoBroker marketplace that ensures that only owners and tenants and buyers connect with each other. From residential rentals, they have expanded to buy-sell of properties. Thus, NoBroker has become the first and only C2C player disrupting this segment in India. Akhil Gupta ji, welcome on board with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
My next panelist is Mr. Kaushik Mukherjee. So Kaushik is the co-founder and CEO at Sugar Cosmetics. He is an ex-McKinsey, ex-Goldman Sachs, a gold medal awardee at IIM Ahmedabad, TEDx speaker, and an Ironman athlete as well. Sugar Cosmetic is a cruelty-free makeup brand that is high on style and high on performance. The brand is inspired by and targeted towards bold, independent women who refuse to be stereotyped in today's roles. Manufactured in the state-of-the-art facility across Germany, India, Italy, US, and Korea, the brand ships its bestseller products across lip, eye, face, and nail categories across the world. Kaushik ji, thank you so much and welcome aboard with us.
Thank you, Bhavesh, for having me here.
Over to my next panelist, Mr. Santosh Ganesh. He is the Committee Chair, Confederation of Indian Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises, the Director for International Council of Technology Management and Applied Engineering, Delaware, USA. He is also an ITIL V3 certified Six Sigma Black Belt as well, project management and ISO 2000 certified business and management consultant, and mentors with 1.5 decade of experience. He is also a BTech graduate in Mechanical and Masters of Business Administration. His experience is not limited to software development, product design, solution design, sales and implementation, turnkey project management, and also lean process for framework. He also has been awarded under the Enterprise for his contribution to the startup ecosystem, and he has authored a book called Bootstrapping Your Way to Success Startups. Welcome, Santosh ji, to this fabulous gathering today. Santosh ji,
Thank you so much. I was unmuted. Okay.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
And let me first of all thank Vertices Partners, Divas, and CIMSME for helping us come this together, and thank you Venkat for helping us get this thing organized for all of us. So let's start with this. My first question is to Mr. Vikram Gupta. Sir, given the fact that you have been a seasoned entrepreneur in various sectors like healthcare, life sciences, consumer, and have been a prolific investor, you have seen various cycles of the journey in the company's lifespan, from creation to investment to exit. As an investor, what are those key parameters that attracts you to a potential portfolio, and what has been the thesis?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here. So So I think being an entrepreneur really helps you understand the psychology of an entrepreneur when you're on the investment side. Being an entrepreneur is not easy. It's very, very hard. So. Only when you have been an entrepreneur, you can understand the hardships that an entrepreneur has to go through and the kind of risks an entrepreneur has to take in their lives to really do something, because odds are always against you if you're an entrepreneur. Especially at the starting point when you have to give up a lot and you're not even sure that you will be able to really take off. So I've been fortunate that before starting IVCAP, I got exposure to being an entrepreneur myself, and IVCAP itself, I started just with a one-man army to begin with, and it was not easy journey. Imagine going to an investor and saying, give me your money and don't ask me where I'm going to invest. I will come and tell you where I will be investing. And if I make money for you, I will take a share of it. And if I lose it, it's pretty much like that. And it's pretty much works on a very difficult kind of level in terms of convincing the investors. So it's a hard journey. So being an entrepreneur in the venture capital space is even harder, and I've learned it over time. So to answer your question, therefore, understanding entrepreneurs' mindset, empathizing with them, making sure that you listen to their story and try and understand where they're coming from is very, very fundamental in our IVCAP philosophy. And that's the primary reason why we connect with entrepreneurs quite well. And of course, this is part of our fundamental thesis. Even the whole idea is that when you're investing as a venture capital fund in an entrepreneur, you actually almost like you marry the entrepreneur over a period of at least 5 to 7 years. You have to work very closely with the entrepreneur, and therefore you have to make sure that you connect very well with the person, with the team, and they understand your psychology, and it's not just like an overnight journey. So I think that's the reason we spend a lot of time before we actually take the investment decisions. So that's broadly to answer your question. I think you're on mute. Bhavesh, you're on mute.
Yeah, my next question is to, thank you so much, Vikramji. My next question is to Ramakant. Technology today is the heart of innovation and scale, right? So from your days of being a part of e-commerce, when it's the country, literally to today, building perhaps the India's largest home interior end-to-end design company, how have you seen the importance of technology increase? And most importantly, in today's world, to what extent do you see this is impacting efficiency and growth?
Thank you, Avesh. So I think I'll just little bit put a context. When you say these times, I think we are more referring to the COVID scenarios and the things have changed all across, which means I think the way we fundamentally live, the way we fundamentally behave is also gone to a change to a certain extent. So there's a change at a fundamental consumer behavior. And I see this is, in a certain sense, good and bad both. So just to add the technology contribution in such kind of changes, when we sort of starting Myntra in 2007, selling apparel on internet was also a change in the consumer's mind. And the change got really have to do with lots of technology evolution, lots of comfort, lots of other things like no question asked written guarantee. There is lots of technology around measurement, sizes, then there is scale, then there's a fundamental trust deficit and comfort zone we need to really establish around e-commerce. And then it became mainstream. In last couple of months when we see COVID, I think many things has gone to a change. I observe a critical change in many education companies where I am in a board of one company and investor in three. Seen like the really perceived value of a virtual class is probably now same as the offline class. It was not before. Now the technology can play a role, how we can have a better immersive experience, the same experience or a better experience which could have done in an in-person setting without much use of a technology. Coming back to LivSpace, we were in a business of selling interior design solutions and renovation solutions. So the example would be somebody wants to renovate a kitchen or a bathroom, and we are a three-sided marketplace. We sell these goods or services through an interior designer network to the end buyer. Now the interior designers used to meet these consumers in person and understand their requirements, propose them design solutions. And we see what was the reason for that. I think fundamentally two reasons. One is a visualization and a trust. Consumers could see a real drawings, like how the home is going to be look like. And by meeting a designer, the trust was established that there's a real person who will own my work and deliver it. I think a degree of visualization and communication, both aspects can be solved by technology almost at 100% level. I don't see a challenge on visualization and communication side if we really wants to evolve on technology, and that's what we did. And the second aspect is how do you build trust on something which is completely virtual. So when I say to the trust, it's lots of predictability, lots of hard work in terms of being really predictable all the time. All of this can be controlled only through technology. Now you need to have a better supply chain, a better technology around your supply chain, better technology around your designs, better predictability around your looks and feel. Now the pink you're showing in a picture should not match the actual pink you're delivering. Earlier, we had an option to send the consumer to the home and see, this is the exact thing we are going to deliver, and this is the color of tile. Now they don't have a choice to touch, feel the color of tile. Hence, we have got a responsibility to show the color on the internet. And all of this can be made only through technology. I actually feel that there is no second way to solve this problem. So I think the technology will make it new normal. Consumers will start trusting the new way of selling. Many things, which is education, I take an example, interior, I took an example. I'm associated with one online medical consultation company. Medical consultation, I think, needs lots of touch feel factor from a doctor, even for a basic consultation. But that has changed. Now consumers are really trusting medical consultation and buying those medicines online and getting better. I think the impact of the solution is almost same, which could have really achieved by going to the hospital. Maybe not 100% same today. Let's say it's a 95% same today. If we can make the technology-driven solution 100% reaching to the same consumer experience and same doctor experience, I think it will change the way hospitals behave. The OPDs will change permanently for the world. So that's my view on the technology opportunity. Rather, I call that as opportunity than challenges, which will bring us operation. Take an example of an interior design project done in person. Almost 20 hours of consultation reduced to 3 hours. It has got zero commuting, same amount of visualization, lesser cost to the consumer. So this brings naturally the efficiencies as well. I think I'm done with the question, unless, yeah.
Thank you, Ramakant. Great, wonderful. Archana, my next question is to you. Since you specialize in the VC and the PE transactions, right, and have advised several entrepreneurs and investors alike and worked across a plethora of transactions, before we get into the nitty-gritty of nuances of the transactions and the key important rights, if I have to ask you about the most important and the macro elements of a deal, what in your mind would you, talk about those macro elements for the deal to take place?
Thank you, Bhavesh. It's a pleasure to be here amongst this panel and hear kind of diverse perspectives from within the ecosystem. I think, Bhavesh, if I had to think about the macro elements of deals, some of which I think Vikram just mentioned, but honestly, one thing that I've learned over the last decade and a half of advising clients, both in the form of investors or promoters, is that a deal is really a deal when it works for both parties. Because if it's one-sided, my disputes partner is definitely going to be busy most of the times. But then that's not really the ideal situation to be in, right? In reality, I think what needs to be factored is that a deal should be a halfway house. And that halfway house is about getting some and giving some. Like when we talk about the macro elements which you're talking about and the key thought processes, to my mind, one very important element for any entrepreneur is the mindset and runway of the entrepreneur, as that really changes the outlook. The outlook while speaking to the investors, the outlook while reviewing the term sheet or the rights encapsulated then. If you do have ample cash runway, a very solid business plan, or you have multiple term sheets on the table as against just one, then your perspective can be very different. As against when you're running out of cash and you need money in the bank at the earliest. I think the other important element to bear in mind is to be important as to what is it that you really are looking at from the investor. Is it just the check or is it something far more in terms of the intangibles? Be it in the form of the experience which the investor brings in, the fact that the nominee director is going to be on the board, the kind of doors which they can open up for you. So there's several things which come into play before even getting into a deal. So these are the thought process. You have to be aware of what is the kind of investor, what is the nature of the investor, what is the stage of investor. Because depending on each of these, their hurdle rates might be different, their commitments to their LPs would be different, the way they look at a particular clause or a return on capital would be very different. So, these thoughts really need to be married along with certain asks of the investor, which sometimes may seem unreasonable or harsh, and certain protections which are needed for the entrepreneur for a deal to really be holistic. Now, if we look at the current times and really put things in perspective, I think in the last 6 weeks or so, we have really seen two broad spectrums. One would really be that there are certain investors who are backing out and the term sheets are getting stalled or the valuations are getting renegotiated or readjusted. But on the other hand, we are also seeing certain investors who are really living up to their commitments. And that too, even in sectors which are very highly impacted. So that really speaks of the character and pedigree of the investors. And I think we are also seeing certain new sectors opening up, technology-enabled sectors are picking up, and there are certain new elements which both founders and investors are looking at. I think we also need to acknowledge that there is a shock which has been caused to the economy and the investments are going to be slower. Now, it's not that there's not capital, there is enough capital and the investors are waiting to deploy those, but it's just going to be a little tougher. The pace will be slower. From a company standpoint, what is important is to really pick your negotiating battles. And for example, you should start by worrying a little less than usual about valuation. I mean, no doubt that the valuation is very important, but I think the other important element or the priority which needs to be given is to the investor in the form of a partner who's coming in, and also the cash which is needed to really move forward in the business. I think what we can look at even to protect the valuation would be certain ratchet structures which could be linked to performance parameters in order to take care of your unnecessary dilutions. You also have structures like convertible notes or warrants, which what they really do is they enable a delta on the valuation for the investor, and you as an entrepreneur are not even locking your valuation today. The other thing I've seen is that certain investors are looking at tranched investments or staggered financings to basically de-risk themselves and bridge the gap between the valuation the disagreements which are taking place in terms of valuation. So what this does is the investor is in better control of the valuation because it's linked to certain milestones. So I think, Bhavesh, on a broad level, what really matters is not just the price, but the person behind the price. I mean, think of it this way, that long after the investment amount would have been used, the investor is still on your cap table. He's going to be on the board of the company. And as I spoke about the intangibles. So the main goal should be to attract an investor in the form of a partner. And similarly, the investors should also treat the investee companies as partners and be empathetic towards the founders, especially in today's times. The idea should really be to get off the table, believing that both have won something and are really looking forward to a partnership. And that, to my mind, is really the true hallmark of a good deal.
Fantastic, Archana. Thank you so much. This is a lovely perspective. Akhil, coming to you, since we had a few investment-based discussions happen, you come from the the receiving side, right? So my question to you is, since most people are in awe of the way you have built the NoBroker, and more interestingly, the marquee names that you have been able to attract on your cap table. And in fact, the last couple of rounds that you have been talk of the town. However, most people generally see the glamour but fail to see the blood that goes behind building a company. So what are those key aspects of learnings that you have had in your journey in the last 6 years of building this huge institution that NoBroker today stands for? Sure.
See, so as you rightly said, people look at the success, and when somebody is growing, people will be there to congratulate you, say, wow, you guys are doing very well and all those things. But as Vikram mentioned in the start, the hardship which a founder goes through, only a founder knows. And we have had our share of hardships when we started NoBroker. And so we started way back in August 2013. It's the time when we started working on the idea. March 2014 is when we went live. People came to know about us in February 2015 when we announced our first round, which was a Series A round by SAF Partners. So that was a long journey. So if you see generally these days, and this was the case in 2015 also, that you have an idea in hand, you will go to a VC, you will say, okay, I have this plan, show the business plan, and people will be ready to fund you. In our case, it was totally different. We had to, we showed a lot of traction onto the platform. We went to VCs, VC said, wow, this is amazing, something like this has never been done across the globe, this will work. But to fund you, we need something which is already available in the West. So that has been the, not now, but earlier it was a sad affair of our venture capitalists that to invest in India, they were not looking for problem in India, but they were looking for something which has already been proven in West. And maybe that was a same thing to do, because the venture capital industry itself is a pretty novice industry in India. So it took us time, it took us a lot of hard work. But the one thing which I feel that works is your perseverance. If you believe in an idea and if you keep following it, your perseverance, your hard work, along with the luck, without luck nothing happens. Along with the luck will take you to different level. Like in our case, we started, we got funding. When we got funded, there were around 10 PropTech players in India, and so to name, I'm sure everybody knows about all those big names which were there. When we were about to close a round in August 2014, we had 2-3 investors who agreed to give us a term sheet, and very night another player raised $90 million from housing from SoftBank, and the next day investors were not around. They were saying, okay, we need to relook into the deal, or we have some concerns about the market and all those things. So we have gone through it. We have seen ups and downs, but one thing what we have always focused on is solving the customer problem. So if you are honestly looking to solve the problem what customer is facing, like in our case, in housing across the globe, nobody does the deal directly. You will have the broker, you will have the buy-side broker, you will have the sell-side broker, you will have the broker which takes cuts from both the sides, and eventually what happens is a customer ends up paying a very high intermediation fee for a very low value what a person was adding. And that's when we believe that if the technology has been able to let people choose clothes online, the way Ramakant was telling that how Myntra changed the way people were doing the shopping online, the way people were using mobile, the way internet was penetrating, smartphones were getting smarter and smarter. We thought we should build something. We should be that platform where everything and anything what the person needs, that will be provided by our app. So as we talk, NoBroker is a platform where you get the right price of the property. So we have the proprietary data where in NoBroker you just don't find houses, you also close your transactions. So you get your rental agreement, you get your packers and movers, you get your home cleaning done, you want painting to be done, that can be done, you pay your rent onto the platform. So it's a single place where anything and everything happens to real estate happens. And with that, the kind of data which we are generating, we have been able to build some amazing tools, like we have the capability to predict the rent of a property to the accuracy of 50 meter, 100 meter. If there are two buildings right next to each other, this one is a luxury building and the other one is a semi-luxury building, our algorithm will tell you that there will be two different price point for the property, a 2-bedroom house which will be taken on this particular apartment. Yeah, so and just to conclude, so if you are solving a customer problem, you are ready to put money back or the value back to the customer's pocket, they become your free marketeer. So in our case, for first year, we didn't have money. We were just spending maybe less than 1,000 rupees per day to do the branding, to let people know that broker exists. But there were 5 other people or 10 other people who were getting houses or who were finding tenants via us without paying anything. They were going and telling others that, okay, something like this exists, please use it. So solve the customer problem, have perseverance, keep doing what you are doing, a bit of luck, and you'll be successful.
Thank you, Akhil. It's a great, understanding now, especially for me also, being one of the customers, I would say, I can now see at a lot of other services that I can personally utilize my own benefit as well. Thank you so much for this insightful thing.
Pleasure.
Let me come to Kaushik. Kaushik, can you hear me? I think you are, can you unmute yourself?
Venkat has to do it.
Venkat, can you unmute?
Now I'm on.
Kaushik?
Done.
Yeah. So we all are getting used to this technology also, right? Great. So
I'm telling you, Bhavesh is better than audio now. Now I'm at least used to it.
So great, Kaushik. So as an entrepreneur, you have been successful in building a consumer brand, and that too in the cosmetic genre, right? Now, what has been your greatest learning over the last few years, and more so, what has been the greatest unlearning over the last couple of months, especially when we all are in this difficult COVID pandemic times?
Sure. Thanks, Bhavesh. That's a question which has many answers, but I'll try to make it personal by sharing my example. I think one of the biggest learnings for us has been market size, because initially when we had started the company, a lot of investors kept asking us that how big is the market size, and frankly, after a while, it got a little irritating. That why is everybody asking about market size? I'm here to build, man. Let me build. And but I'm a little wiser now, because I realize that if it's a high jump competition, and if you're competing with somebody who's jumping on the moon where gravity is 1/6, no matter how much effort you put in, that guy is going to end up jumping higher than you. And that's pretty much what happened to us. The first 3 years, we were in a slightly different business model where the market size wasn't that big, but we just kept thinking that we could push and make things happen. But now we realize that that matters. And I think at times like these, that comes even more to the forefront, because there are some markets which are proven by other larger competitors, wherein you know that there is demand. You try to capture a niche within the sea of demand, right? So at times like these, for example, when we are expecting demand to come back, any business model that is not proven beyond a shadow of doubt takes a massive setback, right? Massive setback. Like to start from scratch and say that, hey, by the way, remember that business model I was trying to prove? Let's start talking about that again. It's really tough. Whereas when you're in a business which is like selling almost commodities, like toothpaste, like say a lipstick or a kajal, the minute non-essential starts shipping, you can see your orders picking up again. So I think personally that has been a great learning for us. The other learning has been, I'm just going to come back to the part about investors and valuations. I think I completely subscribe to the fact that these relationships go way beyond the cap table. And in times like these, you really realize that all that negotiation, I think we like calling it negotiation. It sounds cool. It's actually just trying to arrive at a win-win. It doesn't matter now, right? Because there are companies where you do not have a strong relationship with your investors, and your investors are now reaping the favor back to you, saying that, you know what, there were plans, you've not hit the plans, so the tranches will not be released. So it's not a great position to be in. Wherein if you realize that, as Archana said, it's a win-win, right? And frankly, I think another point of unlearning is that valuation is a very entry-level thought process. Probably because the media talks about it, probably because that's the simplest version of maths which we understand, wherein we say funding amount plus pre-money equal to post-money, hence the dilution. There are so many ways around it. In fact, if you work with Vertexes, they will give you 10 ways in how you can claw back dilution if you really scale if you scale the business over and beyond what you've promised the investors. So, like, I'll give a small example. We were in talks with a few funds, and of course, COVID happened in the middle of it. And suddenly there is this expectation that valuations have to be adjusted. Of course, public markets are being adjusted, everything will be adjusted. So there's a point in the entrepreneur saying that, why me? Because then the investor is also going to say, why me? Right? I think a much better way to say that, okay, we understand that for a fund, IRR is important. So if we have to optimize for, say, a 30% IRR, let's model it out, right? And if the concern is valuation, There are many ways. There's an MSOP way. There's a way to change the conversion. I think we don't sometimes dig deeper into creating options for ourselves. So as we go deeper, I think that's one of the learning which I am still on the way to learn more. But yeah, so that's a bit about it.
Fantastic. Wonderful. So before I come to Mr. Santosh Ganesh, just a quick small announcement. We will have opportunity for Q&A with this illustrious panel as well. So may I request you to either type in your questions or keep your questions ready, or maybe you could push me or a personal message, and I will take it up with this esteemed panelist, or maybe you could raise a hand, and maybe we could unmute you to ask this question also. So this will help us to streamline this entire communication also, and help you get your questions answered as well. So my next question to Mr. Santosh Ganesh. Santoshji, you have been a mover and shaker in creating this confederation, over the past so many years. And in this pandemic times, how do you think, communities such as CIM, SME and chambers can play a vital role in supporting, SMEs and small business as well? So just your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so it's a very good question because everyone is talking about getting funding, capital, and all those things. So you also have to think about that. How do you go ahead and come back or bounce back in this crisis or post-crisis? So the most important thing is basically that if you are planning to go ahead and bounce back, we have to work on creating the demand. And also we need to go ahead and creating a framework where the consumers also start believing you by protecting this what is called social distancing norms and all those things. So right, you are able to see that Domino has come up with a new advertisement, right? That they started delivering the features by maintaining the social distancing norm. So this is basically an approach. So it is basically, if at all, if you would like to bounce back in this post COVID or during this COVID, so we certainly have to go ahead and educate the customer in terms of your new offerings, in terms of your discounting, so that we we create some sort of extra demand in the market, because currently the demand is also on the essential things. Non-essential things are not moving. So we also have to think of positioning that how these non-essential things can be a positioning opportunity in this crisis by giving some sort of discounting, value-added product, or bundling of the product with the essential product or something. So that is one thing. The second thing is basically that today, everything you talk about, the people are talking about how do you go ahead and bring innovations in your mindset or innovation in your businesses. So people started talking about, and in fact, I'm very happy that government also started talking about that. It is the right time to think about design thinking as one of the practices to be implemented across any businesses, you name it. So even the government is also trying to see to it that how design thinking can be implemented in several other government departments. So now design thinking is one of the things that probably we need to look into. So that we'll be able to come up with a better product, and also not about the product. Since the product movement or sales movement is restricted, so we also have to think of that. How do we go ahead and create a service re-engineering or service innovation? Right. So once you go ahead and work as a different line of businesses in parallel to your product businesses, so service re-engineering or service innovation is going to be another thing. And there you certainly have to think of how do you go ahead and utilize design thinking to do that. Now, once you talk about product and service innovation on the side by side, you also have to think of how do you go ahead and utilize your internal capability and the external capability through the perfect collaboration and have a win-win model on this. Because in this crisis, you cannot bring some capital and pump your capital for the innovation of your product or services. Rather, you try to see that if there are some sort of player in the market who can complement each other and come up with a better product and services in the market. So the collaborations and design thinking is going to play a big role. And as a confederations, we are working very hard in terms of seeing educating people to start adopting or thinking out of the box, because traditional business model is not going to work out. So the first and foremost thing, if at all, if you have to bounce back, it is 100% sure that you need to go for a digital transformation. So digital transformation, also parallel to that, also you should see that how you are going to tie up or collaborate across different players in the market, so that you create a community, a demand in the markets. So one is basically you digitize yourself. You empower your organization through digital transformation. You go ahead and collaborate across different stakeholders, so that you will be able to build a win-win strategies across things, and you together come forward and create a collaborative platform like a clustering concept. So we as a confederations, we are now working on a new initiative called National Initiative for Social Technological Trade Holistic Approach. This is an initiative where we are planning to convert, we are planning to invite something like 200 companies under a single cluster, that is called physical cluster, and then we are converting them and we are qualifying those entrepreneurs who are part of our physical cluster through the branding and competitiveness, and converting them into a virtual called digital transformation. Through digital transformation, converting them into virtual entrepreneurs, and with a different type of stakeholder like a large corporates, government bodies, international trade collaborations, and all those things. We are coming up with right now called Global Virtual Industry Cluster, which is the new initiative being taken over by the confederation, and we are getting very good response. We are happy that we have already successfully, in just not even 1 month, we have almost have reached 16 clusters in Kerala and Tamil Nadu, and there is a lot of learning is happening in. And you also know that Mr. Venkat is working on the service cluster, so we are also thinking of that. How do we go ahead and create a competency on the service sector through the service engineering or service innovation, and drive this service cluster through our international linkages. Currently, Confederation is connected to 11 countries. We have set our target that we are coming up with a global leadership dialogue and planning to connect something on 30 plus countries on a single platform from July 1st to 14th of August. So that basically the opportunity where we'll be showcasing our service members or competencies of offerings through our service cluster, and also we are planning to promote our global virtual innovation cluster. So there are a lot of things that we are doing it. I think collaboration is the first thing, innovations is the second thing. Innovation and collaboration both is the first thing, I should say, and more importantly is basically how do you go ahead and re-engineering yourself in terms of product or services, and creating a demand. So these are the 4 things we are planning to emphasize, and we are trying to educate, and we are bringing various government bodies to sensitize our talk, because whenever governments comes and speak, that it's well accepted. Whenever somebody speaks like us, they'll say that you are trying to promote your confederation. Okay, you have some vested interest. But whenever we are bringing some government bodies, like say Niti Aayog, additional secretary was there with us. We have chief innovation officer from Ministry of HRD was there with us. So when they talked about that there is a need of promotion of intellectual property right, promotion of design thinking, it was well accepted. So now things are moving good. I think there are a lot of work to be done, and we are getting there is a new mindset is coming up. So people started understanding the traditional method of working or traditional method of sales is not going to give you the bounce back. Or so you certainly have to go for a digital transformation, and it's the right time to do it. Thank you so much, Bhavesh. Really a great panel to be here.
Thank you so much, Santoshi, on this amazing view of how collaborative effort can bring in a lot of value, especially in this pandemic times. So Vikramji, my next question is to you. Even in this COVID times, when most investors have completely sealed down their investments, and in fact, there have been instances that even when signed term sheets have been pulled back, right? So you continue to still invest, and in fact, recently closed a few transactions as far as my understanding goes. So what keeps you motivated to do so, and what are those most important elements for you as an investor in the transaction to move forward and the closure? Could you give us this beautiful view about it?
Yeah, so I would say that such situations are in fact always offering more opportunities from investment perspective. So I would say that anybody who's sitting on cash looking to deploy in good investment opportunities, this is probably one of the best times to do that for various reasons. One is, of course, there are very good opportunities which may have got funded maybe 12 months ago and were just getting ready to go to market to raise their next round are actually facing cash crunch right now. And, obviously most of the investors are taking view that they're slowing down. They just want to see what's going to happen in the future, and they'll start opening up their wallets a little later. So therefore, there's a cash crunch in the market. So therefore, it may be a good time to really help those entrepreneurs who really need cash at this time, and maybe less kind of worried about what terms that cash comes on, and therefore are open to kind of working with your terms. And the idea is not to squeeze them, but the idea is to make sure that they're realistic terms and realistic expectations set. So that's one side of the opportunities. The other thing which is building up is because of the new normal, there are a new set of opportunities building up. And I think there is a very interesting trend building up in terms of this entire working from home, and there's a huge shift from offline to online. The consumer mindsets are changing. People who had never ordered online before are forced to go online, and various possibilities for healthcare businesses to now come into a very, very different and specific kinds of business models, providing remote advice and monitoring and other things. A lot of possibilities for tech companies with IoT, robotics kind of technologies, touchless technologies, sensor-based technologies, which are going to be used more and more. Anything to do with the infrared scanners or UV sanitizers and things like those. You will see a lot of those opportunities coming up, and even the business models, for example, applications which are aggregating demands at the building level or the society levels are now actually really gaining a lot of traction. So we are seeing a new set of business models building up, which actually need funding at this time, and therefore have the huge potential going forward to scale up. And in the bigger picture, we see this as almost like a J curve. Of course, while in the short term, you will see the demand going down a little bit. In fact, April was bad for almost everyone out there. But May, we started seeing things coming back to some extent. And I think June and July, we are expecting that, things will start moving towards the direction, and we will actually see a momentum where if you would have expected or projected numbers sitting in February when you didn't know that this was going to happen, and now if you project the same numbers, let's say 2 years from now or maybe 3 years from now, you will actually probably in certain kinds of businesses will project much higher numbers, in those time frames. And given that, therefore, the opportunity for an investor like us is much better. And also it's becoming more and more clearer the kinds of opportunities you would want to invest in. Fortunately, for example, we don't have a company in the travel and hospitality in our portfolio. Kaushik was talking about the luck factor, and even I think Ramakant was talking about it. I think, there is that luck factor which has played with us as well. And I think while we were evaluating opportunities there in travel space, we have not invested. And of course, those opportunities, those kinds of investment opportunities will get pushed back. And entrepreneurs playing in the areas like those, real estate, any asset-heavy businesses will probably have harder time. But entrepreneurs working in the areas of medtech, educational technology areas, and other technologies that I mentioned, AI, ML, IoT, robotics, will definitely get more kind of picked up by the investors. So we believe that this is the best time to invest. We are fortunately sitting on cash to invest. Our LPs are very supportive. And we'll continue to invest going forward.
Fantastic, Vikramji. Thank you so much for your wonderful insights. So, requesting all the tech-based guys to reach out to your investors in the market and see if you have some innovative solutions that you could definitely add a lot of value and especially solve some of the critical problems. I think investors are open to look at investments and don't worry about the valuations. That's one thing that the market sentiment is always saying. What is the value that you are bringing will make a lot of impact, and obviously the valuation will follow. So go out, see what kind of products that you are building and how you could be able to add significant value to the stakeholders also. My next question is coming up around that space as well to Ramakant. Can you?
Yeah.
Lovely. So Ramakant, my next question to you is, raising capital always comes with its own set of challenges, right? When in fact, manifold during turbulent times. What has been your biggest learning across these multiple rounds of capital raise that you have done, and how does it is relevant in the intangible benefit of the investors on the cap table?
Absolutely. So, Bhavesh, I think, let me put it this way, from seed round to Series E, I think the earlier round, seed round and Series A, I'd say had a very different, dynamics at that point of time. And the investors, almost like our Series C, led by TPG Growth. Since then, we really moved more of a private equity zone from the venture capital. So I think the belief, the kind of story around numbers. So there is a different point of view. I think the story in the regions changed. But your second part of the question was like, what are the intangible values these folks add apart from the capital? I think they're naturally, all the investors are naturally, I think, taken a position where they are good at. Somebody who is a seed investor is generally a seed investor with a reason. Either they're more passionate on really around innovation. They believe in innovation and they fund innovation. There's an investor who has a less appetite to fund innovation but can fund growth. There are class of investors who are more comfortable really financing or buying equity around the profitability. So I think when we are at a stage of raising Series A capital, we need to really find a partner. And as some of the panelists mentioned in the beginning, like this is a marriage for 7-9 years and it's more than money. I'm actually a very strong believer of that concept. So I think when as an entrepreneur, I'm not sure about my cash flows. I'm not sure about revenue models, but I'm very sure and passionate on innovation I want to bring. I'm really thinking an opportunity and a belief. So when it is called really a marriage and a partnership, I want to have a partner who is also buying innovation. At that point of time, if I find an investor who is buying cash flows, I think it's a mutually loss because I don't have a cash flow. So the intangible value at that point of time was many. I think whatever shape and form, either through, just to name few specifics, and investors generally have at least 5 to 10 times larger net worth than an entrepreneur like me would have. So all of a sudden you go through a greater ecosystem, connects. That's one. Secondly, I think they have seen horizontally more companies than an entrepreneur would be, because entrepreneurs generally are very specialized, focused on their own businesses, but they can really help bring the a perspective from the other board meetings, some other set of knowledge which we think it's readily available in either in the form of board meetings or phone call away or some sort of arrangement. So my sense is that is definitely a kickstart and a flying wheel for any entrepreneur. And then this changes. I think at a later stage, the investors will more help you. How do you plan your IPOs? your exit path, what's the sustainability of the business, what's the really governance framework he wants to put in, which many entrepreneurs who has not seen an IPO in their life are learning first time. Like, to make my company IPO ready down the line 3 years, these are the things I have to start tomorrow. This is something which I think the late stage investors really help in, and I think there's a good degree of intangible to answer in a various shape and form. So, but only one thing is there should not be a mismatch. When I do not have an IP in mind and my investor has an IP in mind, then I think it will be a little bit a situation where both two good people will not be able to make a good outcome. So at a right stage, if you have a right investor, I think that is going to be the key.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ramakant. This is a wonderful insight, especially for startups who are now looking at raising their next capital. This definitely serves some food for thought for them. And definitely with this turbulent times which we all are going through, I think this gives some insights on what they should look first, rather than trying to be on the catch-22 situation. So Archana, coming back to you, my question to you is, in your view, what would be those key rights and obligations that both founders and investors need to bear in mind, when in order to come to a conclusive deal?
Thanks, Bhavesh. So when you talk about rights, I think all my co-panelists will agree that there are a plethora of rights which typically form a part of investment agreement, and we really spend days and nights negotiating those. So let me make an endeavor to kind of summarize some of the key ones here. I think I would like to actually bucket them into broad verticals, and perhaps some rights become relevant for the investor, which are like sacrosanct. Some become relevant for the promoter because they are in the form of protections. And I think these verticals, to my mind, would be personal liability, change of control, corporate governance, which is very important for the investor, exits, which is absolutely sacrosanct, liquidation preference rights, downside protections along with an upside share, restrictive covenants in the form of transfer restrictions on the promoters, preemptive rights, non-compete provisions. I think these are the broad verticals. But if I had to kind of talk a little more about them, I think from a founder's perspective, what is important is to really carve out things which attribute towards personal liabilities. It could be in the form of indemnities or consequences of event of default. The idea should be that just because there is an institutional investor on the cap table, there should not be a sword at the back of the neck of the promoter, because he's the one who really has to run the business. So there should be some liberties or some protections which should be granted to the promoter, especially when it comes to personal assets. And also because, those would typically result out of aspects which are outside his control. So that would be one. I think loosely drafted termination provisions for promoters, and also provisions pertaining to investors taking control of the company eventually. There should be a clear and tangible understanding right from day one as to what really constitutes an event of default and the shift in control, and what really leads to a strategic investments. And that should not come out as surprises. So therefore, the language in the agreement has to be tightly worded to protect those. But if you look at exits, for an example, which as I said is a sacrosanct right for any investors, the promoter has to understand that. Now, while the investors are definitely investing in equity or quasi-equity of the company, and therefore there's always an inherent equity risk that an investor is expected to take, but the promoter should really treat this exit as more of a moral obligation as against just a contractual obligation, and worry less about certain constructs, pertaining to be it drag. So I'll give you an example. A provision like a drag, which sounds really onerous, and one way of presenting it to the founder would be to say that the founder can lose his entire company. But if you look at it from a pragmatic lens, can a drag really be implemented without the support of the founder? Because at the end of the day, the founder has to be a willing seller, and the third party purchaser would always look at an amicable deal as against a hostile founder trying to really disrupt the transaction. So I think such type of rights should not really be looked at as restrictions on the promoter. As against that, if you look at another exit right in the form of a put option to the promoter, which really requires the promoter to provide an exit to the investor by acquiring the shares of the investor. Now they'll have to do it through their personal assets or funds. Something like this should definitely be pushed back, because at the end of the day, exit needs to be treated as a right vis-a-vis the company and not from the personal pockets of the entrepreneur. And I think some of the other important elements which come in is in terms of limitations of liabilities when we talk about the indemnification clauses, the process when it comes to an indemnity claim. The transfer restrictions, of course, are extremely important from the investor's perspective because they're really betting on the promoter. So there will be lock-ins on the promoter. But there could be, we should be discussing transfer restrictions vis-a-vis the transfer by an investor to a competitor, because that becomes very important going forward as well. Then we have other clauses like liquidation preferences to the extent of 1x. Then there are several discussions on whether there should be a 2x or 3x, which tends to become a little unfair. Similarly, anti-dilution rights should be looked at as broad-based weighted average as against full ratchet. So I think it really needs to be discussed by both the parties. And somewhere where in certain deals what happens, especially Series B onwards, when promoters tend to become minorities, we could also look at certain minority protection rights which could be discussed in favor of the promoter. And that would not really be an acceptable ask. And I think so. It's really each of these verticals. Now, from the investor's perspective, of course, the board, seat, and you have to look at D&O insurances, officers in default, especially in today's time, because the way the legislation has drafted the duties of directors, the nominee directors could be construed to be falling under that if there is a default which is committed at the end of the company or the promoter's director. So those also become very relevant, especially in today's times.
Wonderful. Thank you, Archana. This is really helpful for people as well. Kaushik, coming to you. Can you hear me, Kaushik?
I think we'll have to unmute Kaushik because...
Okay, let me come to Akhil till the time we have Kaushik. Venkat, could you help us unmute Kaushik? Akhil?
Yeah.
So my question to you would be, if you look at the pandemic today, right? Work from home is going to be the next reality. So what, according to you, is still, is this an overreaction based on the current emotions? How are you planning to, things in the near long term, both from a business continuity and a scalability perspective? So if work from home becomes the next reality, how do you think, or what do you think, businesses or organizations should look from a business continuity and a scalability perspective?
Yeah. So, in terms of with the current situation, work from home is a reality. Almost everybody is working from home. We also made our 1,000+ people start working from home. And that includes a very big call center support staff, which help people find their house and all those things. So with the tech, we were able to move everybody work from home without any pain or without any change in the duty or the way they were working. So basically, if somebody is taking the call, they still receive the call on their machines. They can make a call from their machine. All the calls which are happening are recorded. Your productivity is monitored. You are still being rewarded for the kind of work what you are doing, which includes your productivity or ability to deal close and all those things. But at the same time, when you say that will it be a reality? Will the world work only from home? I don't believe it. I really don't believe it. So it's a reaction, and people generally have short memory, right? There have been instances in past also, not related to this, but as in when the situation improves, I'm sure people will start working from offices. But what this pandemic has done is that it has proved that technology can help you run your businesses without actually going to the office. very well be very productive at home. Like as we speak, we are highly productive. Like NoBroker has a apartment management app, NoBroker Hood, which is, as Vikram was saying, that there are certain businesses which are able to aggregate the demand at the society and the apartment levels. We have that app in close to 3,000 apartments, and the very next week the lockdown happened, we were able to launch the grocery buying on the app, and that happened just because all of the team was sitting at home. They didn't have to travel. They could just focus. In 24-36 hours, they were able to build and roll out the solution. So that happens for certain sections. Working at home, sitting at home, it really increases the productivity. But at the same time, we need to understand that just by working from home, you cannot develop a character. You cannot understand the psyche. You cannot understand how exactly people are around you. So social interaction, meeting people, drinking coffee together, maybe people who drink, going out, having some parties together, they do form a important part in building the relationship. Like certain things with work from home things are good also, but at the same time, the things which were done in 5 minutes or 10 minutes in the office, where you can just speak to the people, go up to the desk of the person, tell him or her that this needs to be done, that needs a formal meeting. You need to explain something over the phone rather than doing it on face-to-face thing. It takes time. So it has its pros, it has its cons. But if you ask me, will it be the 100% reality going in the future? I don't think so. Once the things settles down, and it has to settle down. If it is like, then we are moving toward the end of the world, which will not happen. I'm optimistic to the core. So we will be back maybe after 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 18 months, we'll be back. Then once we are back, people will forget and it will be all normal, back to how it was pre-COVID days.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you. Yes, we might be shunned, but we might not be, sitting at home forever. So I think though work from home can become maybe a new norm possibility for organizations to actually maybe cut cost or, optimize their resources. But yes, it's another good way to also look at, how we are able to work together around this situation and, bring in the next normal for us as well. So I always say, it's a great analogy that I've put together, in this COVID times. It has also given me, food for thought. So we are like, we all like this, race, horse race scenario, right? Our businesses are our horses and we are the jockeys, right? So what we have now done is we have sat down at our homes and, trying to work out a lot of strategies around how do we maneuver our businesses. But what will happen is this lockdown is the gunfire, right? So as soon as the lockdown opens, we all are going to go out and start working on it. But what will happen? One more thing is that we will have to keep maneuvering our strategies in a more strategic way and more focused way as the race progresses. So we'll have to keep a very close eye on a lot of aspects. No longer we can afford to have high burn rates or high cash flows moving out of the system. We don't need to. We cannot plan for 3-6 months. I think that period will shorten up at least for the next 3-6 months or 2 in a year, till the time the system comes back into its own habit as well. So with that, Kaushik, my next question comes to you. So from your perspective, who do you think are the most important stakeholders in the business, and how do you manage the relevant expectations efficiently and successfully, especially when it comes to investors?
Thanks, Bhavesh, and I apologize. I heard your last part question to Kaushik, and then my Wi-Fi started acting up. I had to switch to data.
Understood.
I think a personal growth journey for me has been that initially, whenever I used to think of the word stakeholders, I used to confuse it with shareholders and always think that, okay, who's my boss, right? Who am I answerable to? And the board. And that was the first point of communication and management. Now, I think I realize that, especially in a situation like this, there are many stakeholders true to the meaning of the word. So, of course, investors continue to be that, but our customers, first and foremost. the employees. I think there's a lot that can be done to help startups come to terms with and come out. I think I resonate with what Akhil says. It's 9 months, 12 months, 18 months, it has to get better, right? And the point is, yesterday somebody was circulating a Times of India news article with me that said that lipsticks are declining, eye products are going to take, does that impact you? And, my response was that, I cannot agree with this, because that is anybody can. I don't care if it is factual or not, right? The point is, my job to be optimistic, to believe that we are going to climb back from this. And if I don't believe it, my stakeholders won't believe it, which means my shareholders won't believe it, my board, my customers, my employees, nobody's going to believe it. So I think it is very important for us to continue to believe that, this is temporary and that we will come out of it. Having said that, there are two things which we've done, and I think I've seen a lot of other startups also do very successfully. One, when there is uncertainty, it helps to provide whatever certainty we can for not on a daily basis. Like for example, if some organizations are planning to make some roles redundant, or if they are planning to pivot some businesses, it is easy. Like for example, in our case, we reallocated some team members, irrespective of their JD, just to clear the doubt that, we are still, we're all intact. It's just that you're going to be doing something very different. I think you have the skill sets to do it. Do it for quarter 1, quarter 2, let's come back. But that communication which you did back in very early in Q1, I think that helped allay a lot of fears, and so the team could focus on meeting the challenges with their best efforts. Same with stakeholders. I think same with our investors. I think to our investors, our communication straight up front was that April is going to be a zero revenue month, and that is, now everybody is used to hearing that, because a lot of companies have done a zero revenue month. When we had told them in the end of March that April is going to be zero revenue month, but the more we said that, initially it sounded odd, then it sounded realistic, and then before long it's like, yeah, it's the same case for everybody. But accepting that early on and talking about it really helped come clean and set expectations. Same with customers. I think there was a lot of discussion about essential and non-essential items, and for a consumer company's good, it is so tempting to pass off everything and anything as essential. Fact is, we were not essential when 90% of our products are not essential. So to our customers, we just took a call to tell them that there are going to be delays. So if you're okay with a 3-week delay or a 5, maybe a 1-month delay, please place your order. We will honor that, whether prepaid or COD. And I think that communication helps us manage expectations. And in times like these, we will be optimistic. That helps us provide more clarity to all stakeholders, and helps us take each day at a time and come out fit.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Great perspective. My next question goes to Santosh Ganeshji. Santoshji.
Yes, please.
What are your thoughts on the opportunities for businesses to look at global export market and expand their business to achieve scale and growth? Especially there has been a talk about the global aspect, right? So what are your thoughts on this?
See, government has come up with a mindset that no, they are now not going to import. They are looking for import subsidies. So once the government is trying to see that they are putting a lot of money in terms of getting the product manufactured in India, so the opportunities is 100% going to increase for the SMEs. That is one thing. So other side is basically, since the movement of the product and services, whatever you say, movements of goods are restricted, and that carriers, even though flights are now flying, but challenges are there basically that is being restricted in terms of limitation, the goods carrying capacity, or whenever you are traveling, you will not be able to carry a 15 kg of hand luggage or something, whatever was there. So now even yesterday I got to know from the Gatti Logistics, they are also telling that whenever the goods is also getting shifted to this airlines, so they are trying to maintain some sort of distancing norm whenever they are placing the baggages in the cargo. So that is one thing. So that means it is going to be the costlier, even though if you are trying to do some sort of export business, and the government also has to reopen the more of the flight, and all of the thing has to go live, then only we'll be able to think about the export of product. But certainly there is a huge demand is coming in for export of services. So the people who have got some sort of competencies, I think that there is a huge opportunity is going to come from the globe, all across the part of the world, I should say. So export is definitely going to be a good opportunity from the service-oriented perspective, but for the product market, I am still, I think we have to wait for coming up with some sort of clear idea on whether the export is going to pick up or not. But there is in process of Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan and coming up with a policy like coming up with what is called import substitute framework. So a lot of SMEs are going to be benefited because automatically the demand is going high. Once your import is almost locked, so certainly there is the production has to happen locally. So the company has got a larger opportunity to serve the local market through the local manufacturing and all. So that way the demand is certainly going to high, and service export is going to be is one of the things. So we are continuously talking to our members, and we are also spreading the talk that let's talk about service innovation. Through service innovation, we'll be able to benchmark ourselves in terms of global competitiveness, and also be able to build our competencies through collaboration. So if we're planning to do a larger win in the global export market, I think collaborations has to play a big role, and competency. So yeah, the service export is going to be there. Product export is going to be challenging due to the resistance of air carrier and all those things. But demand is certainly going to be good.
Amazing. I think we are actually going great on time as well. So as I see, we have 12 minutes. What would you recommend? Would you recommend we could take another one question quickly, easily from my end, or maybe we could open it up to the panelists or to the audience? Any thoughts, panelists?
I think we can take it from visitors. Once again, Kaushik is lost. Kaushik is unmute. Please unmute, Kaushik.
Thank you. I said that the audience has been very patient, so maybe we could open it up in case they have any questions.
Right.
Great. So can we open it up, Vikram sir, with your permission?
Yeah, sure, please.
Yeah, because the first question is actually to you, in fact. So Gurkirat Singh is asking a question to you, Vikram sir. How would you evaluate opportunities in the B2B area in the medtech sector, where home healthcare might play an important role?
Yeah, so I think, of course, in the new normal, in the new situation, I think the consumer minds are also changing with respect to the home healthcare. Prior to COVID, there were businesses like Potia, Care24, and a few others who have actually been doing this. But I think some of them have been having problems in scaling up despite having raised substantial capital. I think there is an opportunity to relook at this business model and combine the technology and the human aspect to it, and really build a business model which can be scaled up quite substantially. I think there's a huge demand for services, especially home care services. But the biggest problem in this sector is, one is, of course, you're dealing with large number of humans, becomes a huge execution issue. And the other issue, it's basically all linked to execution. The biggest problem in the scaling up of this business is the execution. And it's all related to, because it's a very services oriented business, and any business which has service orientation with the human aspect to it becomes difficult to scale unless the technology brings a lot more potential revenue streams to it. For example, can you build a platform and sell products? Can you do other things like diagnostics and provide pharmaceutical drugs, or provide a lot of patient data, or create a lot of patient data to actually help back the patient in terms of doing other things, predicting their future health and things like those. So there are opportunities for if one approaches this space differently as compared to just building this model as a pure play, providing nursing services at home. So that's two different kinds of ways to deal with it.
Amazing. Any other panelists would like to add? Archana? Okay, great. So my next question comes, here, especially when Vikram mentioned about data, right? So we have Mr. Venkatesh Iyengar, who runs a data analytics startup, and he says he makes your data work for you. So his question is, as a VC, what would be the matrices you would look for monitoring and measuring promoter and their companies from a data perspective? Vikram, so would you like to take this?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, so I think data, of course, any entrepreneur who's looking at building a company based on, aggregating or consolidating data through a platform or through various sources, I think eventually is creating a lot of value over a period of time. And that's the reason you will see companies like Khata Book raising $60 million without having much revenues right now. You'll see a lot of other such companies raising a lot of capital without actually showing any kind of traction on their revenues, but still burning a lot of money. And that's primarily because they're able to sell the vision that, they are really going for a land grab of the people in the space, and therefore the quality and the quantity of data they're going to, generate over a period of time can then actually do a lot of things. We have a company in our portfolio called PharmaRack, which actually works with almost about 70,000 plus pharmacies and almost 7,000-8,000 distributors of pharma drugs. And the amount of data that they generate is just mind-boggling. And that's what they plan to do over a period of time when they reach 200,000 pharmacies, or a total of about 800,000 pharmacies in India. And imagine if somebody has grabbed almost about 300,000-400,000 pharmacies and most of the drug data going through the platform, then your revenue stream is not just how you generate SaaS revenues on your platform from a pharmacy or a distributor. Your customers change all of a sudden. You'll have customers like pharmaceutical companies who are doing research on new drugs, governments who need this data to even predict a pandemic like this, and even during a pandemic time like this, exactly which geographies, which zip codes are having bigger problems and where the problems can be solved. And something like this, if combined with the Setu Arogya app, can actually do wonders in actually solving a COVID problem. So the value of a platform like that multiplies substantially. So therefore, data play can change the value of a business substantially.
Interesting. Amazing. That comes to my next question to the panelist from Mr. Samir Sotur. So are investors considering pre-COVID, during COVID and post-COVID era comparison to know the current mindset of entrepreneurs? Anyone can take it. This is an open question.
I think my 2 cents on this depends, but again, if this is going to be a fundamental shift in your business, then definitely yes. Like, is it really a temporary reduction in demand and then there is some sort of recovery? I think obviously that is considered as well, but from a very different lenses. Then something fundamentally changed. So the one clear distinction is that the business and the consumer behavior and the supply chain behavior or something has changed fundamentally to a different thing. Then I think the investors would want to know what is the changed reality. and really assess the opportunity of what is going to happen, the change, post change. If it is really a transient situation, I think it is very hard to really, it depends on the situation and your cash flows in bank and how do you negotiate things. That is too tactical. But my sense is we need to really think through is the fundamentally the business model is going to change forever now. And certain businesses that is true.
Great. Anyone else? Someone wants to take up? Any other thoughts from the panelists?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll add a bit to this pre-COVID, post-COVID debate. The entrepreneur VC before the deal happens works in a very predictable way. The entrepreneur is always extra optimistic that we are going to build this no matter what, and the investors always extra suspect about it that it may not work or whatever Google builds it. So now in such times things have tanked even further, right? Because irrational optimism will just sound like hot air without any base. So post-COVID, I think discussions, if anything, have to be more meaningful. I mean, the times are gone when you can just go and command stratospheric valuations based on we are going to build this by pumping money and just blitz scaling, right? There is no blitz scaling when there is COVID. We have to first, show a roadmap as to how we can leverage whatever we have and climb out of it, right? There is no takeoff in a rocket into the sky. So I think a lot of my startup friends, so to say, they've also changed their narrative by taking a longer term point of view, and a lot of investors are completely being supportive about that. That okay, I think conversations are actually become more honest and open, if anything, between all the founders and prospective investors.
So I think, Kaushik, the next question is directed to you itself, in fact, from Mr. Nitin Gupta. So he says, hi Bhavesh, I have heard an interesting thought from retailers that in the downturn, education and cosmetic markets do well. What's your thought, Kaushik, if you could answer this?
There's this article that's been doing so education, no doubt about it, because people need to feel good about themselves, upskill themselves. I think we are seeing some crazy numbers from Unacademy, Udemy, Vedantu. So, I mean, that's a more natural beneficiary of this. The cosmetics thing is a little tricky because there's an article which talks about the lipstick index and says that, the Great Depression, World War II, lipstick sales actually went up because people needed to, the target audience needed to, dig into their source of happiness and feel good about themselves, which is fine, which is also what I shared till I realized that people are wearing masks. So lipstick index has to, factor that. So, but I think, as I say, never let facts come in the way of a good story. So yesterday's article happily said that it's the mascara effect, not the lipstick index. So give it a new name. I don't think the cosmetic and beauty industry is going to go anywhere, but we're not a very direct beneficiary of this. I think Zoom, for example, whatever we are on, you've seen the graph which shows the stock price taking off. Zoom is today apparently worth more than all the airlines of the US combined together. That's crazy, right? So we're not that direct a beneficiary, but yeah, in the long run, I think the industry is strong and safe.
Amazing. So in fact, Kaushik, I saw this one, interesting video where there is a woman who's actually getting ready to go out, right? But you cannot go out with a mask. So what she's doing, sticking a lipstick. So maybe that's a good idea if you could come out with, some kind of a sticky, a lipstick model, which can be, bought. I'm happy to maybe take a small sales cut out of this also.
Bhavesh, the minute people start doing that, we'll be out of business. So I'm going to pretend we didn't have this conversation. So
no, I'm saying, this is a good idea that you could come out with some, space like this, which comes from the table of sugar, and you apply this as a sticky, which actually looks like a lipstick as well. So
I think is the mother of invention.
Absolutely. In fact, what I've also seen is there are people who there is one company in South who is actually printing masks with your lower face thing, right? So look at the kind of innovation which has happened. You would have
Amazing.
never thought that such kind of a application can be utilized, in today's world as well, right? I think keeping in mind the time constraint and being a moderator, I think I have one last question, and I think I do deserve that as well. So let me, and this is a very interesting question that I personally have been trying to seek in and maybe seep in. So Archana, this is to start with you. Okay, my question is, if you had to give one piece of advice to your clients, right, or to startups, or be it an entrepreneur or an investor, what would that be?
So I think more than an advice, I would like to really request the investor in terms of empathy, which is really the largest form of comfort that can be granted to an entrepreneur today, which means to be rationalistic about the rights, to ensure that we understand that there are commitments to your LPs. So those have to be taken care of. But also what needs to be factored in is certain nuances which are relevant to the promoter. And I think my request to an entrepreneur would be to really respect your investor and investment. The key should always be to treat the equity with the lens of debt. The way you would have if there were EMIs to pay and there was some collateral attached to it. While in the case, it's very easy to start looking at it for the next. I think that demarcation, treating it with the same lens and respect of debt is what shows the mettle of the entrepreneur, and in the long term really builds tremendous credibility as well in the eyes of investors. So these would be my two requests to investors and promoters.
Toshi, any thoughts from you on this? Akhil?
Yeah.
Any thoughts
So-
on this?
Yes, basically, I'll say, and I mentioned in the first answer also that build what you believe in, solve the customer problem. You may have a little bit of hiccups in terms of the changes which has happened across the globe. But if you have the right problem, what you are gunning for, which is eventually going to make an impact in the life of a customer, and it really solves one of the pain point in the daily life of these customers, you are good. You may be a little bit slow, but everybody else is also slow. So it's not only that your business is not running, or you are on zero revenue, or maybe on 20% of revenue. Everybody is like that. So we can take this time as a stopgap, that whatever it is, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, and say, okay, we are starting back.
Amazing. Kaushik? Anything from you? Especially for entrepreneurs, you being on this side as well, right? Are you able to, Venkat?
Yeah, now I'm able to. I think the mute button I have any issues. I think it's important to understand that there's no quick fix, and the minute we can accept that and prepare for the long haul, the whole perspective changes. I mean, I've been reading that cliched book, Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz, finally, after many recommendations. And a lot of the lessons over there are gold. I mean, the point is, we need to take responsibility. That, if it impacts an employee, if it impacts my stakeholder, firstly, the entrepreneur needs to take responsibility, right? I mean, we chose to build in an industry which faced the shock from an unpredictable thing like that. We chose not to build something like Zoom, right? So take responsibility that yes, this is our thing, and then completely back what Akhil said. That lays a platform for you to say that, but we are building what we believe in, and it just changes the trajectory, into something very strong and honest. So I think the advice is a very strong word, but I think I can tell you what we are doing is we just think that we are in it for the long haul. We are building. We are planning 2025 now, right? I mean, as long as that plan doesn't get impacted by this, we're all going to come out of this.
Great. Any more thoughts from the panelists before I call this as a day for a wonderful learning?
I think I'll just add the last thing.
Yeah.
I think if there are situations which are really, we need to really do some sort of a course corrections and measurements, this is more for entrepreneurs. I think a very collaborative approach, starting from your employees to your customers to your investors, there is a less pain when it is collaborative, and pain is distributed in various shapes and forms, which essentially means, sometimes you're giving a better payment terms and EMIs to consumers. At the same time, consumers are really giving you some cash flow in advance. Sometimes there are adjustments in the salaries in the employee, but it's paying back in the equity form on the ESOPs, which is a overall larger currency. All of us work together. Sometimes investors are really willing to create additional pools on the cap table. So I think one message, if it is that situation, which is I think a situation for many entrepreneurs during this scenario. So taking a more collaborative approach where there's a willingness to share the pain around all of your stakeholders, I think that will make it a little bit easier and easy to really navigate. So that's my last thought for many young entrepreneurs in the call.
Great, amazing. Thank you, Ramakant. Santoshji, any thoughts from you?
Yes, I'm there. Tell me. I think, see, the one thing is happening is basically that there are, brand valuations is changing. The other side is also that, let's say we have been taking Colgate. Now, if your Colgate is not available in the nearby store, people are opting for a new brand. So there is a shift in brand is happening. So what is happening is altogether the entire game is changing. Because if a product is available in the market, you are there. Okay, and if at all your product is not available, they are ready to opt for the second brand or the non-branded product also and try it out. And people started adopting it. So they may continue after the COVID-19 also, they may continue with the second brand or the second choice or the second opt they have got it. So so you have to put now as an entrepreneur, we also have to work on creating the repositioning, right? So the post-COVID, the game is changing, is going to be different. Okay, because a lot of valuations is the other side, the brand positioning also has to be rebranded together. So I think this is the last thing I can ask.
Amazing. So I think it's time for us to bid goodbye. But before we bid goodbye for this particular amazing interactive panel discussion that we have been able to put together, I think it is my humble responsibility and honor also to though we can't give token of appreciations, because we are all virtual, right? But what we could do is we could obviously give some of the best wishes to all of us, to come out of this particular turbulent times, especially entrepreneurs, innovators, and business owners, to see how we could be able to add value and move forward. So with this, not taking much of everyone's time, I think it's been a fabulous evening, especially for me, and I'm sure for all of us who joined in. We learned really a lot of imperative aspects of how businesses are built, and how ideas can be generated during those, these turbulent times as well. And we hope we don't have more COVIDs happening in the near future. But let me take this opportunity to thank, Vikramji, Ramakant, Archana, Akhil, Kaushik, and Santosh, and to Venkat also, who's been there with us to help us and support us in making this entire online event smoothless. Also, thank you, Vertice's partner, especially Archana and Vinayak Bhai, for putting this entire panel together, for inviting Millennium Divas and also CMSME to be a part of this. So with this, we look forward to another exciting day. Do reach out to me or Archana or any of us, and in case if you have any further questions, happy to float it in to all the participants. We'll also share a post-event link to all the participants for them to go through this particular webinar details. So with that, I conclude this session. Thank you once again for being a patient listener and for ensuring that we add value and spend valuable time together on this. So thank you so much for your valuable time and for valuable hearing to us.
Thank you so much, Bhavesh. Really, really great session.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.